Welcome to Phoenix Podcast, hosted by Amin Modanian, where we deep dive into politics and economics.
Politics and economics.
And today we're diving into something really fascinating.
Yeah.
This idea that America goes through these huge societal shifts like clockwork every 80 years.
Yeah, it's like these institutional cycles.
Institutional cycle.
Almost like clockwork.
So not just like little policy tweaks or anything like that.
No.
We're talking
Massive changes.
Yeah, fundamental changes to how the country works. And a lot of times it seems these things are kind of kicked off by major conflicts.
Yeah, it's often wars or some kind of major conflict.
So it's not just that history repeats itself. It's like America has these built-in reinvention periods.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Wow.
And one of the things that's really interesting is that this seems to be tied to how America views itself.
Okay.
You know, unlike a lot of countries that have these really long histories and centuries-old traditions,
Yeah.
the U.S. is all about building the future.
Okay.
It's constantly striving for something new.
That makes sense. I mean, we always hear about this American exceptionalism.
Right.
The idea that we're different. We're always pushing boundaries.
Exactly. And that drive to create, to innovate,
Yeah.
it's kind of woven into the fabric of the nation.
It's sort of who we are.
Yeah. It's almost like each cycle starts with a fresh blueprint
Okay.
for how to be American.
Okay, so where do we see this pattern start to play out? Like, take us back to the beginning.
Well, the first cycle really kicks off with the founding fathers
Okay.
and the creation of the Constitution.
The Constitution.
And it's important to remember that they were coming out of a revolution,
Yeah.
fighting for freedom from a really powerful centralized government.
So this is where we see that classic liberal thinking.
All right. Abstract.
Limited government, individual liberty, all
that jazz.
Yes, they were deeply skeptical of concentrated power.
Right.
So they designed a system with a small, decentralized government,
Okay.
one that wouldn't infringe on individual rights. So this model works for a while, but then boom, the Civil War
Yeah.
throws a wrench in the system.
Exactly. After about 80 years, the limitations of that small government model.
They become really clear.
Yeah, it became painfully clear.
Painfully clear.
The country was literally tearing itself apart.
Yeah.
And the need for a stronger, more unified nation became paramount.
Okay, so this is where we see that shift to a more powerful federal government.
Exactly. More powerful federal government. The Civil War really forced the U.S. to reevaluate the balance of power. And so the second cycle that we're talking about,
Yeah.
this is where we see the rise of a federal government that's really focused on holding this very diverse nation together.
Okay, so keeping the country unified.
Yeah, ensuring stability and unity.
But even with this more powerful federal government, the focus was still primarily on political cohesion, not so much economic intervention, right?
Yeah, for the most part, the prevailing thought was still rooted in limited government involvement in the economy. But then, just as this model seems settled, the world throws two massive curveballs.
Oh boy.
The Great Depression and World War II.
Talk about a 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
This is where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah, you could say that again.
Yeah.
These events really just completely upended the game.
They changed everything.
And ushered in what we now call the third cycle.
The third cycle.
You know, before the Depression, the idea of the government like intervening in the economy,
Yeah.
that was practically heresy.
Right.
But the scale of this crisis,
Yeah.
it demanded a new approach.
Okay, so this is where we see the birth of the big government era.
Exactly.
FDR, the New Deal, all of that.
Exactly. The government had to step in to provide relief,
Yeah.
create jobs, and try to stabilize the financial system.
Right.
And then
World War II.
World War II amplified the shift even further.
Okay.
To win the war.
Uh-huh.
The government had to mobilize the entire nation,
Right.
collaborating with industries, universities on a scale.
I mean, just the sheer scale of it.
Unprecedented scale.
Like the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
Harnessing scientific brain power
Exactly.
to create the atomic bomb.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty stark example
It is.
of government-led innovation.
Absolutely. And it's not just the bomb. Think about the internet,
Mm.
radar technology, even jet engines. All these innovations
Really?
had roots in government-funded research and development.
During this period?
Yeah, during this period, the government wasn't just a regulator anymore.
Right.
It was a driving force.
A driving force.
Behind technological advancement.
It's amazing to think about
Yeah.
how those wartime innovations shaped the world we live in today.
Yeah.
But this massive expansion of government, this rise of the technocrats, as some call them,
Right.
it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it?
No, you're right to point that out.
Yeah.
While there were some undeniable achievements,
Yeah.
the downsides of big government also became more apparent.
Like what?
Well, bureaucracy grew, government spending just ballooned.
Uh-huh.
And the complexities of trying to manage such a massive system
Yeah.
became increasingly challenging.
I imagine it's like trying to steer a giant ship.
Yeah,
Slow a turn.
that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And even small adjustments can have like these unintended consequences.
Right. You don't know what's going to happen.
Exactly. And as we entered like the latter part of the 20th century,
Okay.
a lot of people started to feel like that ship was drifting off course.
Really?
There was this growing sense that the government had just become
Too big.
too intrusive,
Too much.
too disconnected from the needs of everyday people.
Interesting. So if we're sticking with this 80-year cycle theory, are you saying we're due for another major shift?
Potentially.
Another reinvention of the American system?
Well, let's do the math.
Okay.
The third cycle began roughly around the 1930s,
So
which means
we're right on the cusp
we're right on the cusp
of that 80-year mark.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just assume for a second that this pattern holds true.
Okay.
What might a fourth cycle look like? Are there any clues from history?
Well, it's always tricky to predict the future,
Of course.
but we can look at some of the historical trends.
Yeah.
And consider some possibilities.
Okay.
So, for instance, one recurring theme in American history is this tension between centralization and decentralization.
Okay, so that push and pull between a strong federal government
Right.
and individual liberties.
Exactly.
It seems to be a constant throughout these cycles, doesn't it?
It does, and you can see that tension playing out right now.
Where?
In debates about everything from healthcare
Okay.
to education to technology regulation.
Wow.
So the question is, how will that tension resolve itself in this new cycle?
Okay, so are we talking about a potential swing back towards a more limited role for government?
Maybe.
Like a return to those principles of classic liberalism that we were talking about?
That's one possibility.
Okay.
There's certainly a growing sentiment among some that the government has just become too entangled in people's lives.
Okay.
So the idea of empowering individuals
Yeah.
and communities to take more control of their own destinies,
Yeah.
that has a strong appeal for many.
It's like that classic American spirit of self-reliance
Right.
resurfacing.
Exactly.
But on the other hand,
Yeah.
we're also facing some massive global challenges.
We are.
Climate change, economic inequality, technological disruption.
Right.
That might require more, not less, government intervention.
That's a crucial point you raise.
Yeah.
The solutions of the past might not be adequate for the problems of the future.
Right.
So perhaps this new cycle won't be about simply shrinking
Right.
or expanding the government, but about fundamentally rethinking its role
In the 21st century.
in the 21st century.
Exactly.
Crazy.
Maybe it's about finding a new balance.
Right.
A way to harness the power of government to address these really complex challenges.
Yes.
While also preserving individual freedom and fostering innovation.
Exactly. And that brings us to, I think, a really crucial question for our listeners to ponder.
Which is?
What role do they want to play in shaping this new cycle?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 3.
Okay.
We'll explore what it means to be an American in this potential new era.
Okay.
And how we can all participate in shaping the future we want. We've been talking about these 80-year cycles in American history, these big shifts in how the country operates.
Right.
And it seems like we might be at the beginning of a new one.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating possibility.
It is. And as we're kind of going through this potential turning point, I think it's worth taking a minute to think about.
Yeah.
What are those core values that have kind of shaped America's journey so far?
Yeah, what are those constants, those enduring threats that connect us to the past,
Right.
but also point us towards the future?
Exactly.
Well, I think one that really stands out is this deep-seated belief in
Yeah.
individual potential.
Individual potential.
This idea that anyone, regardless of their background, can achieve success
Through hard work.
through hard work and determination.
It's that classic American dream narrative
Exactly.
that's drawn people from all over the world to America.
Yeah, it's the spirit of the pioneers heading west.
Yeah.
It's the entrepreneurs launching startups in their garages.
Right. It's like this belief that we can shape our own destinies.
It's woven into our national DNA.
It is?
And I think alongside that individualism, there's also a strong emphasis on innovation and progress.
Progress.
You know, America has always been a nature of tinkerers,
Yeah.
inventors, risk takers,
We're always pushing the limit.
constantly pushing boundaries,
Yeah.
embracing new technologies, challenging the status quo.
It's like we're wired for change.
We are, and that ties into another key value, adaptability.
Adaptability.
Throughout history, America has demonstrated this remarkable ability to adjust to changing circumstances.
So like economic upheaval, technological advancements.
Right, global shifts in power.
It's that resilience.
Yeah.
That ability to bounce back your challenges and emerge even stronger.
That's what has defined us as a nation.
Defined us as a nation.
It's not just about surviving.
It's
about thriving in the face of uncertainty.
So we've got this unique blend of individual ambition, a drive to innovate, and this incredible capacity to adapt.
Right.
So how do we take these values and apply them to the challenges that we're facing today?
That is the million-dollar question.
That's the big one.
As we're entering this potential new era,
Mm-hmm.
it's not enough to just rely on the solutions of the past.
Right?
We need to think critically.
We need to have those tough conversations.
Engage in open dialogue. Be willing to challenge assumptions.
It's about taking ownership of the future, isn't it?
It is.
Not just waiting for somebody else to fix things, but actively participating
Yeah, stepping up.
and shaping the world that we want to live in.
Exactly. And I think it's also important to remember that progress is rarely linear.
It's not a straight line.
No. There will be setbacks,
Of course.
disagreements, unexpected twists and turns along the way.
That's life.
But as these 80-year cycles suggest, it's often through these periods of disruption and transformation
Yeah.
their new possibilities emerge.
So if you had to boil it all down to one key takeaway for our listeners, what would it be?
I would say embrace the uncertainty.
Embrace the uncertainty?
We are living in a time of profound change.
Absolutely.
And that can be both daunting and exhilarating.
Yeah.
But instead of fearing the unknown,
Yeah.
let's view it as an opportunity to shape a future
A better future.
that reflects our values and aspirations.
That's a great point. It's not about predicting the future.
No.
It's about creating it.
It is.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through American history.
It's been a pleasure.
And we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning,
Yeah,
and keep diving deep into the issues that matter most.
absolutely.